Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach. Let's get stuck into this ruck division. Obviously, I've gone through the back line and the midfield in terms of ranking all the relevant SuperCoach players for 2018. They sometimes are a bit of a longer video, but hopefully it gives you guys a bit more of a definitive answer in terms of some of your questions when comparing players. So hopefully that has helped. I've got 9 guys in terms of the premium status, and it did prove a bit difficult ranking them because the ruckmen are difficult. There's not as many options, so getting it right is super important. But the mid prices was pretty straightforward. I mean, for starters, I don't think we should be going with a mid pricer. But look, going towards the premiums, there's 9 of them. I'll rank them 9 to 1, and I'm sure our good friend Chesh on my shirt will also give a bit of a timestamp on those, which he's been doing on my videos, which is much appreciated, so thank you, mate. But in at number 9, well, before I do rank them, a few names. We've got Cruiser, Ryder, Nankervis, Jacobs, Goldstein, Nick Nat, Martin, Gawn, of course, Grundy. So plenty of guys to take a look at. But in at number 9 is the much talked about Nick Nat. Now, that's a guy who's definitely going to cause plenty of debate, and already has. Just for the record, I picked these players basically if I think they're relevant or if they're in 5% or more teams. So Nick Nat is in 18% of sides, and clearly he's a bit cheaper this year at 465k, given he didn't play all of last year. But he has been battling just to get fit for round 1 this season. There's plenty of talk about him even possibly playing in the finals last year if they made it all the way through to the granny, and maybe in prelim, I think. But I mean, that was clearly going to be a real stretch, and somewhere along the line, I don't know what's happened, but he's definitely stagnated in his recovery. Had to play in a waffle match the other week just to get a bit of fitness. Talk was he got through okay, but the reason he comes in at number 9, and I just don't think we can consider him, because he's not that cheap. Maybe if he was a mid-price type at around, probably 350, maybe even high 300s, all of a sudden you might consider him. But at 465, he's basically a guy that we need to pick to be a fella that we keep for the whole season. He's not going to make us a lot of money, needs to be a keeper. Now, I just don't see that happening. He is clearly going to work his way into the season. I don't think he's the sort of guy that, I don't think anyone's really the sort of guy, there's not many out there that can have such a long time out of the game, particularly a fella who relies on his athleticism and his jump to just come back in and start scoring beautifully again. Maybe a bloke who doesn't rely on his pace and is just a contested beast, maybe they can just slot back in nicely and dish out handballs from a stoppage. But a fella like Nick Nat, I think he needs a good run at it and needs that real dynamic ability to jump at the ball and really use his flair and speed and groundwork to do his best stuff. So I don't see it happening. Previous averages, his best is 114.2 in 2012. 2016 and 15 saw him average 105.9 and 103.9. So even when he's been out playing, it's not like he's a super premium anyway. He's shown very good averaging before and probably coming into the prime of his career prior to the injury. But I just don't see him, even if he is named round 1, I would be steering clear of Nick Nat for all the reasons I said. I just think we needed to see a great pre-season from him. Certainly needed a JLT game from him. We didn't get it. I think we've got to go a safer option alongside Gawn. In at number 8 is Todd Goldstein, 521k. Obviously averaged 94.8 last year. He's in 5% of sides, and he's probably yesterday's hero. He's a fantastic player of the past for us. Of course, some averages from 2011. 113.2, 93, 113.5, 106.9. The big one, 128.8, 108.1 and 94.8. And North Melbourne are looking to transition into the next wave of players, and Braden Pruce is part of that. We saw bits of it last year where they shared the ruck and Pruce got a bit injured. He missed a few matches. Goldstein, clearly wasn't at his best, and the talk is he's looking good through the pre-season. But, who isn't at this point in time? I think they're going to share it a fair bit. The last JLT match, I can't remember the exact numbers, but they did share the ruck. The hit-outs were quite even. Goldstein is in that twilight period of his career, and I think we want to be picking a guy who has a real responsibility to the team, not someone who's passing the baton to the new fella. So I don't think, even though at 521k he's cheap in Goldstein terms, I think that graph is most definitely on the way down. 7, Sammy Jacobs, 526k, 95.7. He's in 7% of sides, and I just don't trust Jacobs a whole lot. I think sometimes the conversation we have with Ruckman is, will they be solo rucks? If they can ruck on their own, they'll dominate. Jacobs has that assurity to be the main man. But what I'm not quite sure of is whether he will produce premium numbers. Now, we have seen it plenty of times before, but in amongst that, we've seen a few years where he'd rather forget. And, you know, going from a few years back, we've seen averages in, 2013, I think it was 102.1, then down to 85.3. Then he was right back up to, I can't even read my own writing there, in 2014, but there we are, 115.4 was the big one in 2014, 108, then down to 86.8, then 95.7. So it has been a couple of seasons since we've seen a three-figure average. He does rack up the ball very nicely. He works his way into the passage of play very well. They have no problem giving the big fella the ball, but I just think there's better options in terms of ceiling, and I feel like his best footy is past him, so we're looking for him to reach back towards it. He's certainly not building towards his best, so that's why he finds himself in at number 7. I just don't think we've seen enough consistency year on year, and where he's at in his career, I just don't think it makes him a trustworthy selection. Number 6 is Matty Cruiser. Now, he's obviously extremely expensive at 603k after averaging 109.8. He is in 6% of sides at the moment. Of course, there was a little bit of an injury in the JLT match. He looks like he'd be fine for round 1, the season opener, so that's good. The reason he finds himself in at 6 is not to really say he's going to have a poor season, but I just think at that price, it's just far too risky, and I think the 5 guys in front of him are better options. I think Cruiser may well outscore a few of those guys, but in terms of starting him in your side, I think we can definitely pass on him. Certainly the fact that he's copped that little bit of an injury, because history suggests Cruiser does get injured quite a bit. You know, we've seen, I felt like last year was a long time coming for Cruiser. We've seen him average pretty nicely at times, 2012 and 2013, 92.3, 97.9. Then the next 2 seasons, he only played 1 game in 13 games, and then 73 averaged, I think, in 2016. And then bang, we finally saw what we've been expecting for so long. But I just think his body lets him down quite frequently. So to pick him at that sort of a price, you really want a durable ruckman, I think, to pay 600k. And he's only produced premium numbers on 1 occasion. So I think that's fair to say on that point. In at number 5 is Nankervis, 488k, 88.8 average, and he's in 8% of sides. That's a lot of 8s there, but look, that's how it all panned out. But look, he's clearly a guy who's a pretty nice option. Started the year really well last year and then seemed to tire a bit. You know, his last, I don't know how many games it was, but his first 8 games, he averaged 102.9, and then from there on out, the remaining games, 12 or 13, I think it was, averaged 80.1 in the home and away season. So I think that's pretty much typically a sign of a fella who was handed the sole and main man ruckman and did it really well, but for the first time he got that mantle and then he tired a bit. So I think we saw probably what we'd expect in the first 8 rounds, you know, clearance work, tackles, getting in there as another midfielder. You know, he came from Sydney looking for that opportunity and he got it, but a fairly young man in terms of AFL experience, and he tired towards the end. Played some reasonable finals, but I think for the bulk of the season, struggled to really put together a consistent season. So maybe he can do it this time around. JLT form suggests he certainly can. The reason he finds himself in at number 5, I think he's nicely priced, but I think there's, as I'll discuss in a minute, a few guys who are better options and they're not that much more expensive than him. So I do like what he brings to the table in terms of his aggressiveness, competitiveness. He's a bit of Shane Mumford about him, but I think there's probably guys who have that and a little bit more of a body of work and runs on the board, which I like. But he is fairly popular, as the 8% suggests, so he's certainly on a few minds out there. In at number 4 is Paddy Ryder, 566k, 103 last year. He's in 12% of sides. And he's a tough one to read, and I tried to read him last year and I got it wrong. He was one that I certainly felt would be a bit of a trap, and he certainly was, and he produced a really good season after missing all of 2016 with the Essendon stuff, but he bounced back and was really good. But a little bit like Jacobs, he has that main ruck spot all to himself, but has also shown over the journey that he can be a bit of a yo-yo in terms of scoring. If we go from 2011, where he first really broke out, to the present, 90.9, 105.5, back down to 90.2, up to 101.1, down to 85.4, then he missed a year, then 103. So he's been quite inconsistent from year to year. Obviously circumstances change with different team members and fitness and things like that year on year. You could probably delve far deeper than the raw numbers, but that does say to me that he's not just a bankable option that we can lock in for 100 average. So I think he's a pretty handy option. You know, he's in the top 4 of options for mine. He is a little more expensive than the top or the next few guys. Or yeah, all of them he's more expensive than, and you're probably pretty sure who I'm going to say. But I think Ryder's a good option without being one of my first picked. I think the fact he's a little bit more expensive, I don't quite trust that he can reproduce it. I think history suggests that he's just as good a chance to average 90 as he is to average 105. So I would much prefer a little more safety and trust in terms of selecting a guy at that sort of a price tag. In at number 3 is Brodie Grundy. Now, he's been a guy that I have had in my side for a lot of the pre-season, has recently exited. He's 534k, 97.3, 6% of sides. And he's one of those ruckmen who love to find the ball, not necessarily a hit-out guy. If you compare him to Ryder, you know, Ryder sort of averages your 11 to 12 touches a game, more of a hit-out guy, where Grundy is more of a quantity-based ruckman. Loves to get a few hit-outs, of course, it always helps, but he can find it 18 to 20 times quite comfortably. Averages 18 touches a game the last few seasons, and those few averages of late, 90.6, 95.7, 97.2. So the graph is trending up, but I think his ceiling probably isn't quite there. 9 tons last year, only 4 of those went beyond 115. So I think his ceiling could potentially get up there. Not many 120 plus scores at all. And the reason he finds himself at number 3 and left my side was the fact that Mason Cox seems to have a bit more of a prominent role this year. Grundy will certainly be number 1 ruck, don't get me wrong, but it does concern me that they seem to be, in that last JLT match, I know Cox kicked 4, but the comparison in hitouts was about 37 to 19, and that's good numbers from Grundy, but it just worries me that Cox was getting that much of an opportunity, so it just scares me a little bit when you see that. So it's just a bit of an unknown factor how much Cox will affect Grundy's scores, but the fact that we even need to talk about it raises a few question marks. So I think his graph will still trend up. Whether that moves him to 99 or 105, well, that's going to be the difference, isn't it? Whether that's a good selection or not. So there's a little bit of the jury's out on whether he can absolutely take that next step, because I was really big on him before Cox started to hit a bit of form. So that's probably the only spanner in the works there. In at number 2 is Stephen Martin. He's my man at the moment alongside Gawn. He's 540k, 98.2 last year, 10% of sides, and his JLT form has certainly done him a bit of favours. You know, certainly a lot of people getting on board after he's really looked the goods. A few averages, 2014 to the present, 111.7, 110.8, 89.7, and 98.2. And, you know, you could probably argue the point, you know, he dropped to 89 average. You could argue a similar point, as I mentioned, with Ryder and Jacobs earlier. But I just feel a little bit safer just in terms of the style of ruckman he is. I love the fact that he can find plenty of the ball. You know, his best footy, those big averages have seen him, you know, get 20 touches a game on average, and he's a clearance king and has shown that he can really hit that 110. Even looking at Jacobs and Ryder, most of their averages, I know Jacobs had a big year, but most of them are between 100 and 105. Martin has shown when he's the main man, and we hope Archie Smith doesn't get a go for our sake, but if he's the main man, he's a guy who can find it 20 to 25 times quite easily, tackles, clearances, and plenty of hit-outs as well. So I think he's a really good option At this point in time, it looks like Smith isn't in the calculations. That could change at certain points in the season. Let's hope it doesn't hurt us, because Martin, like most ruck options, when forced to share it, his numbers go down. So if he can be the main man in there, then he's going to look the goods. And number one, no surprises here, it's Max Gawn. And he simply picks himself. I think for a long time, we've all known that Gawn would be in our teams, and he's an absolute lock. You know, he's priced at 503k, 91.6 last year, but we all know he had the injury, did that quite early, and hurt a lot of people. He's in 61% of sides, and I sometimes wonder about these percentages, because I just don't know how you could rock up the SuperCoach and not pick him. Like, any monkey should be locking in Gawn. What are 39% of you guys doing out there? Sure, gee. I hope it's none of the shorty community. Gee, if you're one of those guys who doesn't have Max Gawn, then goodness me, what are you doing with yourself? But, you know, sometimes I even wonder if they're just teams that were made, you know, 3 months ago or something like that, you know, even at the start of SuperCoach or whenever it was, and they just didn't put him in at the start and they haven't changed their team. I sometimes wonder. He's an absolute lock, because we know in 2016 he averaged 118.5, was dominant. He's an enormous man, a huge figure. He can go forward, he can kick goals, a huge threat in the air, and he can find the ball a fair bit for a big man. He can really get involved in the play. He ticks all the boxes. The only concern, which I raised this time last year as well, was the body. That is an absolute concern, no doubt about it, because history suggests he can really get injured quite easily. He does have a few issues. Pre-season's been good, so at that price, we've just got to take the risk. Everyone is. So, you know, if we fall on our sword, then we fall together. So it really isn't going to be an issue. I think he's a guy that we've just got to take the risk on, because if he gets a full season out of himself, he's going to be the number one ruck. I would find it hard to suggest, unless there's any big surprises anywhere else, be hard to go past Gawn being the number one ruck, because if he is getting a full season, you'd have to think it's 115, sort of give or take, really. So I think it's got to be around that. So he's a man that we've quite simply got to have a go on. So that's where I see it. Ranking him 9 to number 1, Nick Nat, Goldstein, Jacobs, Cruiser, Nankervis, Ryder. The top 3, Grundy, Martin, and of course Max Gawn. So certainly a few guys to think about, but that's how Shorty sees at this point in time. Not far from round 1 now. I'll just flip the old notepad over. And we won't spend too much time on the mid-prices, because I think definitely the structure you want to be rolling with is Gawn, and one of those guys probably in the top 5 that I just mentioned before, maybe even Cruiser if you got a bit of spare coin. So I really don't think these mid-price guys are worth considering. There's been a little bit of talk and a few guys discussing it, but I don't know if it's really... It's more of just a bit of talk. I'm not sure if anyone's really going to lock these guys in. Obviously, the numbers suggest some do have them, but it's a pretty brave option. So we're going to talk Dawson Simpson, Scotty Lysett, Mason Cox, just the 3 guys. They're sort of in a handful of percentage sides, sort of 4 to 5%. In at number 3 is Mason Cox. He's at 304k, 55.4 last year. He's in 5% of sides, and a lot of the hype around him is clearly come off the back of the Dogs game. He had 12 touches, 8 marks, 4 of those contested. He kicked the 4 goals, along with 19 hitouts. As I suggested with Grundy, you know, certainly they're going to share it to an extent. Grundy will be the number 1 ruck, but Cox has shown an ability to certainly kick goals and take marks, and he's a big unit. There's no doubt about it. He's tough to stop in the air if he's in form. So certainly could be a handy player for Collingwood if he can develop. But we absolutely should not pick him in SuperCoach. He's in 5% of sides, and it concerns me to see that number, because there is no way we should be picking him. No way at all. This bloke is a secondary ruckman. He's not the main man in the side. He's a big fella who hasn't even grown up with the game. And when I've watched him in the past, he's shown glimpses, but I think the jury's out if he's even going to make it as a footballer. I mean, that sounds harsh, but I don't know if he's just, you know, a lock in their side. A Collingwood supporter may say otherwise, but I just think he's very, very liable on the ground. I'm not sure if he's going to be a great option forward, because teams can run it out of defence very easily off him, and he's not the most mobile guy once it hits the deck. I think if he was a fella who was playing solo ruck, you know, if Grundy went down, then sure, maybe we'd have something to think about. But he's only played the 20 games, and in his whole career he's only had 1 ton, and he's only gone 75 or more on 3 occasions, and one of those scores was a 75. So he really hasn't shown any signs of being a scorer. 2 games without Grundy last year, rounds 21 and 22. 21 wasn't so good for him, just the 5 touches, 25 hitouts, 33 Supercoach points. 22, he had the 9 touches, 43 hitouts, which calculated to 95 Supercoach points. So, again, whenever a guy shoulders the ruck on his own, he has more opportunity to score points, and it always helps. But he's not going to get that this time around. So, we're going to see games where he plays a fair bit forward, pinch hits in the ruck, Collingwood have a bad day, and he scores 40. So, I just think that's a massive risk to go with a guy at R2. I think it's far more safe and much more simple to just go Gawn and a Grundy or a Martin, a Ryder, or what have you, like I said off the top. So I definitely think that is the option you've got to go with, because he's a massive trap as far as I'm concerned. I don't think we should be considering a guy for our ruck position that isn't even the main man in his own side. So that rules him out as far as I'm concerned. In at number 2, Dawson Simpson. Of course, a bit of talk about him if he can get that main role at the Giants ruck, but Rory Lobb seems to be tracking okay now. Played a game the other week. Looks to be going okay. Fairly on track for round 1 by all reports. Dawson Simpson at 290k, 88 average last year. That was just from a couple of games, 5% of sides. And we did see he played 2 games without Mumford, rounds 19 and 21. 33 hitouts, 85 Supercoach points, 44 hitouts, 91 Supercoach points. And he's a big unit, 210 centimetres. I wrote down kilograms there. He is 109 kilograms, but he's a big unit, 29 years old. He is a real journeyman. You know, he's played for so many years and has always been a guy always waiting for opportunity, and I don't see him getting too much of it again this season, unfortunately. He'll probably play more than a couple of games, but again, I would envision him sharing the ruck, if anything. You know, I think Lobb showed that without Mumford in the final series, he could ruck solo extremely well. So I'm not so sure Simpson will get great opportunity. If we're discussing Lobb and he's injured, then maybe we've got another story on our hands, but I really try to avoid that mid-price ruckman. I really do. I think it's so difficult for that selection to go right, because if it goes wrong, all of a sudden you're searching for options. If it goes wrong early in the season and you try to go down, there's not always a good option around that rookie price. Through the midfield, forward line, back line, there's always options coming through. There always is guys on the bubble. Ruck, not so much. And if you want to try and go up, well, trying to find 200k early in the season can really throw some plans out and put you behind the 8 ball. And it's not easy to just find 200k from nowhere at round 4 or 5 when you realise it's a poor choice. So I think it's fraught with danger going to mid-pricer in our ruck. So I've got to put a line through Dawson Simpson, given the fact it looks extremely unlikely that he'll be the main man in the ruck. In at number 1, albeit it's a bit of an empty number 1 position because I don't endorse any of these guys. Scott Lycett, 277k, 63 average from, what was it, just the 1 game last year. He's in 4% of sides. And the reason I put him number 1 is because I think of all these guys, and there's only 3 of them, I think he's probably the most likely to be a success, even though I don't think he will be. I think he'll probably have the highest average. The fact is, maybe he'd be somewhat relevant if Nick Nat was going to miss more footy. But it looks like even if he doesn't play round 1, we'll see Nick Nat in the first few weeks. All of a sudden, that makes Lycett the second ruckman. You know, they're going to share it most likely. He'll find himself forward a fair bit. But he did show signs in 2016. You know, we saw an average of 83.2. He had scores at 118, 116, 100, 113, 115, 113, 104, 107. So he showed some real good signs. That's plenty of scores sort of as, you know, a promising developing ruckman. He's 25 years old. So he sort of was coming into his prime before he got that injury. So I think, you know, he's certainly a likely type. We've spoken about him in the past. I don't think he's a good selection, but of those 3, he does find himself on top of that list. As I said, if Nick Nat was out for a while, then all of a sudden you would have to think about him. But again, I'd be putting a line through him simply on my philosophy on mid-price rucks. And he is coming off a long-term injury too. So the jury's out on whether or not he can find that form again or how he's tracking. So it's an extremely risky move either way. So I wouldn't be going with him, and I wouldn't be going with any of those mid-price guys. As I said off the top, structure-wise, I think this is definitely the season to go set and forget. If ever we're going to go a mid-price ruck, then the only way we would ever do that is when we can bank on their scoring. You know, the guy like Sandilands, I think that's when the risk is worth taking, because you're extremely confident in them scoring. The only concern is their body. So I think when we're looking at mid-prices this year, we're concerned about their scoring, we're concerned about their job security, and that's not a good combination. So pick one of those premium guys alongside Gordon that I mentioned. I think that's definitely the way to go. So pretty simple in the ruck in terms of structure. Picking that guy alongside Gorn and nailing that will be the tough part. So good luck to you. Hopefully you can nail it. Hopefully I can go nicely with Martin, see how he goes. But anyway, we'll keep moving on with the vids though. There's certainly a few more to come. I need to do a rookie video, finish off this sort of segment in terms of the forward line. Otherwise we'll have a few must-haves, traps, and yeah, hopefully the Q&A video worked out alright for you guys, and you know, hopefully you got to your question and enjoyed the response. Certainly enjoyed getting plenty of comments and questions. That was great. So thanks again. And off the top, I'll certainly have to mention it off the top, I should say, in future videos, but hitting 1,200 subs, that was a goal of mine, to do it by round one. And when I said it, I thought it was sort of, you know, reaching a bit. You know, I thought it might be unlikely and hit at some stage in the season, but we've hit it and we're, you know, 4 to 5 days out already. So that's really good to see. Thanks for everyone who's jumped on board, and thanks for everyone who's been around for a while. Much appreciated. So I'll sign off anyway, guys. Have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.